We interrupt your usual YouTube viewing to tell you about this non-current event that happened in a peaceful, fictional city in the US that's not located in Vermont.
You know, I've never been to Vermont before.
Anyway, in these past non-current events in Elwood City, there has been a fire at Lakewood Elementary. No students were hurt by this occurrence, except for Mr. Morris, one of the staff members who ended up with a broken leg. The students of Lakewood Elementary will be attending Mighty Mountain until the school is fully repaired. My name is Vivian, but you can call me Viv, in case you didn't know that. And this is Arthur and Buster, best friends for life, non-current news, signing off. A lot of serious stuff happened in the Arthur series, such as a death of a beloved pet, getting lost, hitting your own sibling, stealing, and getting scared by a real-life ghost. You know, the basic dark stuff. But these few things only affect a few people. Nothing that affects an entire community. Such as April 9th, which is directed by Greg Bailey, written by Peter K. Hirsch, storyboarded by Gary Capel and Jeremy O'Neill, and everyone else who was responsible for creating this two-part episode. Let's get started. It starts out with Sue Ellen narrating about the event, about it being just another ordinary day. Arthur argues with DW, their dad has a catering gig, and kids of Lakewood head to school. At least, most of them. None of them are aware about the disaster and the aftermath of the disaster that is coming their way. The disaster finally comes and everyone is affected by it in different ways. The main ones being Arthur, Buster, Binky, and Sue Ellen. Binky saw the flames. Arthur is worried about his dad because he was catering at the school when the fire happened. Sue Ellen suffers the loss of her diary/journal to the cruel flames and the cruel water. And Buster wasn't there when the slowish, fiery chaos happened, and he wished that he was. These elements are carefully and uniquely woven to this disaster aftermath story that was loosely based on 9/11. Since this episode aired over a year later after the Twin Tower tragedy. Later that day, I suppose, at the treehouse area, they talk about what happened and that they're going to Mighty Mountain tomorrow, and Binky acts all tough about it when he mentions that he saw the flames. And he leaves because Buster annoyed him and steals his ice cream. Then we hear Sue Ellen crying. Muffy is confused why Sue Ellen is crying over a journal/diary that you can buy anywhere. Francine tries to bring some sense to her, but of course, this is probably what Muffy hears. Later, Binky's PTSD kicks in when he sees something fire-related on TV. Then, the next day, on the Mighty Mountain playground, Muffy gives Sue Ellen a new journal/diary to cheer her up, but Sue Ellen denies it because it can't replace all the personal stuff that she had put in her old one. And of course, Muffy still doesn't understand. Buster tells a fictional story pretending it to be all true about him being near the fire to the Mighty Mountain kids, and Arthur points this out to them. And to sum it all up, Buster is having trouble relating to everyone else's feelings about the fire. Later that night, Buster and his mom talk about it, and around the end of their conversation, she asks Buster to do something tomorrow. That night, Arthur has a nightmare of what could happen at his dad's next catering job. Next day, Buster visits Mr. Morris at the hospital to drop off his mom's flowers, and Buster says that he's meeting someone, but I think that could be a lie. Then he discovers that Mr. Morris has asthma like him, and then Mr. Morris shares his chocolates with Buster. At At school, Buster tells Arthur and Brain about the visit. And then we discover that Arthur's worriment about his dad, that's giving him nightmares, is not making him sleep that well. Buffy gives Sue Ellen another journal/diary with Sue Ellen's name on it. Sue Ellen takes it and says that she feels much better. But I don't think that she means it. Then we see a gloved hand that's about to pull the fire alarm. And from the orange sleeve, we obviously know who it is. Next part, everyone is outside and Francine discovers that it was a false alarm. Buster is disappointed, then Binky gets caught with the evidence of his backpack. And as punishment, he has to help Oliver Frensky pick up litter instead of getting suspended. Binky discovers that Mr. Frensky used to be a volunteer firefighter, and that he saw a scary fire up close, same as Binky. But Binky still doesn't open up about his feelings about the fire and keeps up with his tough guy persona. Later on, Mr. Morris tells Buster about his first encounter with the possible evidence of alien spaceship landing prints in a typical cornfield in 1967.
It's all true.
Buster discovers that Mr. Morris's broken leg won't recover back to its original condition. And I guess that makes Buster feel something other than wishing that he experienced that fire. Then later, I have no idea about the time jump length, but it's April 16th, which is the day of Arthur's dad's next catering job. Arthur lies about having a sore throat so his dad can stay home to make him some chicken soup. Of course, his dad can't right now. This worries Arthur about the horrible possibility of his dad dying because of another tragedy, and accidentally drops his sore throat act. Arthur's dad figures out what's going on, and he tells Arthur of a time, when he was little, when his mom was in a car accident. Luckily she wasn't hurt, but he was worried about her every time she drove a car. Then he created his own superstition that involves getting more paper ball shots than he missed. And that's better than my old superstition when I was little. That involves I won't get bad luck if I don't look at a turned off fan when its pinwheel stops spinning. I don't know why I thought like that. I was a weirdly creative kid back then. I guess I still am. Anyway, Arthur's dad continues the story and says that there was one time that he forgot to do it, and his mom was gone for 3 hours. Arthur wonders what happened, and of course, death is easily ruled out. Nothing happened to her and she was fine. And he ends the story by saying that it's a parent's job to worry about their children, and not the other way around. Days later, on April 18th, Sue Ellen doesn't write that much about anything in her diary/journal, but then she gets inspired by a mural. And then there is a montage of the creation of a Lakewood Elementary mural that we won't ever see again. I can understand why. We can just imagine it being there. Anyway, the school reopens and Francine asks people what it's like to be back at Lakewood for the Frensky Star. We don't know what Buster's answer is, but Sue Ellen is happy because she found a piece of a postcard from her long-distance friend in the gutter. And for Binky, he answers with a long, well-detailed sentence of how he feels.
No comment.
But later, he expresses how he feels by imagining Smoke and running away from the school. He meets Oliver Frensky, and Binky briefly explains of how he's feeling. Oliver relates to what Binky is going through, and he says talking about it is a good way to feel better. Binky is still afraid to go back to school and gets to hang out with Mr. Frensky until he feels better. Meanwhile, Binky is missing out on some middle of math class diary-free chocolate welcome back cake. Buster wants to give one to Mr. Morris, and we still don't know his first name, but then he learns that Mr. Morris isn't in today, and that he's retiring. After school, Buster visits Mr. Morris and learns that he's moving to New Mexico to live with his daughter. For 2 reasons. 1, he has itchy feet, meaning he doesn't like staying in one place for too long. 2, he needs someone to look after him for a while. In this case, his daughter. He gives Buster his accordion, named Beatrice, to look after. Mr. Morris suggests for Buster to bring her along when he visits him in New Mexico, which Buster doesn't do. One unknown length of a time jump later during the evening, Arthur does that superstition his dad told him about when Buster calls him on the walkie-talkie. Buster tells Arthur that he's been missing Mr. Morris and that he would still be here if it weren't for that fire. But Arthur tells him that he wouldn't have met Mr. Morris and became friends if it weren't for that fire. Hold it! What about the time when he met Mr. Morris when he wore that mop on his head? In the episode Arthur Accused? And that other time when they both met again in the episode Pinky Rolls? But then in this episode, it appears as if this is the first time that they both met. Anyway, Buster plays Clementine on the accordion. Without getting any more closure with Pinky, in Sue Ellen's room we hear her narrating as she writes in her new diary/journal. She writes about it almost being a whole month since the fire, and that she never wants to experience one again. But she also doesn't want to lose this feeling that each day is special, and that her best friends are the best friends in the world, and if they all stick together, they can make it through just about anything. The end. What are my opinions about this episode that's almost like a special? Well, to get the negative stuff out of the way, I feel like this episode is a little dumbed down. Only by a molecule, such as one or all of the characters dealing with someone who died during the April 9th fire, and how it affects them. But I guess that makes sense that they didn't do that. Because the timeline of this series is still jumbled because of the creators of the show decided to do that, which leads to a bunch of continuity errors for a bunch of episodes. Or they decided not to do it because there doesn't need to be any death to consider a tragedy a tragedy. Anyway, another problem that I have is what David Reed tells Arthur about schools being safe places. And that's sadly not true. Not because of faulty wiring. The other thing that has been happening on this world for ages before it got popular attention. And I can understand why this wasn't addressed in this episode. Because that's a completely different tragedy that's not happening in this episode. And also, David Reed probably believed what he said. Besides my opinionated flaws of this episode that has to do with death and blah. There are two more flaws that I have with this episode. One has to do with Muffy's stupidity that never gets resolved, or ever. Then lastly, the jumbled timeline construction of this episode. And that leaves us in the dark with a lot of confusion. With those flaws aside, I think this episode is great. It touches upon tragedy that most children's TV shows aren't brave enough to do, or never think about discussing it in one of their episodes, or they never got the chance to do so. So, I will give this wonderful episode an A-. As you may or may not know, this will be my last Arthur episode review. I wish I could continue this ongoing journey of all these Arthur episodes that might never end, and all the little things that I could say in them, but it's not for me anymore. And each one takes a lot of time to write the script, then record my voiceover, and edit that voiceover because I make a lot of mistakes, and then I edit the visual parts. And I don't want to repeat this formula for hundreds of Arthur episodes that's going to take years for me to do. And for me, this channel is an awesome hobby. And I'd rather use that formula for things that I really, really want to do. Such as theories and top 10s, And hopefully I won't overwork myself with all these ideas that I have in mind. And also there are other things that I want to do that are outside of my YouTubing hobby. That's all I have to say. Goodbye everyone, and have a wonderful kind of day.